in the clatter and diesel breath of a sprawling army motor pool, where rows of green trucks sat like sleeping beasts and the air always smelled faintly of fuel, rubber, and wet steel. A quiet old man moved between the bays as if he belonged to the shadows rather than the uniforms. He was elderly, American, with a neatly kept white beard and a face weathered by sun and hard seasons, wearing a faded red work shirt, blue jeans, and worn boots that looked like they'd walked through more mud than pavement. Boots scuffed at the toes, the leather cracked where it bent, the soles patched like a man who fixes what matters instead of replacing it. He carried a small tool pouch and a clipboard, but he didn't bark orders or demand space. He simply checked tire pressure valves, inspected tow hooks, and wiped oil from a dipstick with the same calm patience you'd expect from someone who didn't need to prove anything. Most of the young soldiers barely noticed him, and that was fine, until a group of new mechanics, fresh out of training and full of swagger, spotted the boots. It began the way disrespect always does, a laugh too loud, a joke meant to pull others in, a little cruelty dressed as humor. "Yo, check out Grandpa's combat boots," one private snorted, nudging his buddy. "Those things belong in a museum." Another leaned back against a Humvee, grinning. "Nah, man, museum's too nice. Those boots belong in the trash." The old man didn't look up. His eyes stayed on a brake line fitting he was examining, fingers steady, movements careful. That silence only fed them. They drifted closer, a loose semicircle of cocky young men in clean uniforms, their voices bouncing off the concrete like they owned the place. "Hey, old-timer," one called, dragging the words out, "you lose a bet, or you just allergic to new gear." A couple of them laughed, the kind of laughter that tries to make bravery out of disrespect. The old man finally straightened, slow and controlled, and his gaze moved over them like a quiet measurement, not angry, not scared, just present. "Boots still work," he said simply, then bent back down to his task. That should have ended it. Instead, it turned their teasing into a mission. One soldier stepped closer and tapped the toe of the old man's boot with his own, as if testing it. "Still work, huh?" he mocked. "What do they do? Squeak when the enemy shows up?" More laughter. The old man's jaw tightened for half a second, then loosened again. He returned to checking the truck like the insults were wind. The soldiers took it as permission. Another private picked up a rag and flicked it at the old man's boots, splattering a stripe of grease on the cracked leather. "There," he said, smirking. "Now they match your vibe." A sergeant walked by at a distance and didn't stop. The motor pool was loud, and the culture here rewarded toughness, not courtesy. The old man kept working, though something about his stillness felt different now, like a storm held behind a closed door. Then the stakes showed themselves in metal and timing. An MRAP in Bay 3 was scheduled for a live convoy readiness inspection in less than an hour, and the young mechanics assigned to it were rushing a repair they didn't fully understand. The old man heard it before he saw it, the faint hiss of a line not seated right, the subtle tick of a torque wrench slipping on a bolt head. He stood, walked over, and pointed at the undercarriage without drama. "That's not seated," he said quietly. "You roll that out, you'll bleed pressure under load." The lead private scoffed, eager to regain the spotlight. "We're good, we followed the manual." The old man's eyes didn't change. "Manual doesn't know what you missed," he replied. The private snorted and looked to his friends. "Listen to him. Mr. Antique Boots thinks he's the safety officer." The laughter returned, and the old man's hands curled once around his clipboard, then relaxed. He could have walked away. He'd walked away from arguments before, from pride, from people who want it to be right more than they want it to be alive. But this wasn't about being right. A vehicle rolling wrong could hurt someone, maybe the same young men laughing now. He took a slow breath and said, "Shut it down and receipt the line." The private smirked. "Or what? You'll report us. You don't even have rank." The old man looked at the boots everyone kept mocking, then at the MRAP, and for the first time there was a hint of weight in his voice. "I don't need rank to recognize a mistake," he said. The private laughed again, until the distant sound of a staff vehicle entering the motor pool cut through the bay noise like a blade. "Keep listening, and which city are you listening from? And if you enjoy the story, please subscribe for more." The staff vehicle didn't stop their mouths at first, only softened them, because young arrogance always believes it has time to retreat later. The group of mechanics shifted their posture, suddenly busy with tools, suddenly focused on bolts they'd been ignoring, while the old man returned to the MRAP bay like a quiet shadow that refused to be shaken off. The lead private, cheeks still flushed with the need to look tough, bent under the vehicle and hammered at the fitting as if force could replace precision. "See," he said loudly to the others. "It's seated. Old man's just hearing ghosts." Another soldier grinned and pointed at the worn boots again, lower now but still cruel. "Maybe those boots got trauma. They flinch at every hiss." The old man didn't answer. He crouched, leaned in, and watched the line the way a surgeon watches a pulse. He'd spent years learning what failure looks like before it happens, tiny signs that show up a heartbeat early, so he spoke once more, calm as stone. "It's cross-threaded," he said. "Back it out and do it clean." The private rolled his eyes. "We're not taking instructions from a contractor." He said contractor like it was dirt, like the faded red shirt meant the man had no story worth hearing. The old man nodded, almost as if acknowledging a rule of nature, and stepped back. For a moment the private's confidence swelled, and he turned to the others with a smirk. "Watch," he whispered, loud enough for the old man to hear. "He'll just go sweep somewhere." Then he did something small but poisonous. He reached down, flicked the old man's boot with a wrench lightly, and laughed. "These things even steel-toed, Grandpa, or just steel ego?" The old man's eyes rose slowly, not snapping, not flaring, but steady enough to make the private's grin hesitate. "Don't touch me," the old man said softly. The private's smirk returned, defensive now. "Or what?" he challenged, and the others leaned in, hungry for escalation. Motor Pool felt tighter, louder, the air thicker with that childish courage that only exists when danger hasn't arrived yet. The old man's voice remained even. "Or you'll learn something you don't like," he said, and turned back toward the bay doors, choosing discipline over confrontation. That refusal to fight them again made them bolder. Another mechanic, trying to impress, picked up a rag and tossed it at the old man's feet. "Here," he said, "wipe the shame off those boots." A few laughed, but some didn't. A younger private on the edge of the group shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting toward the staff vehicle now parked near the admin building. He'd noticed the escort, the posture of the driver, the way people were suddenly moving with caution, but he didn't speak. Nobody wanted to be the weak one. Under the MRAP, the lead private forced the fitting, and the line finally seated with a rough jerk. "Done," he declared, wiping sweat from his brow like a hero. He signaled to another soldier. "Start it up. We're rolling for inspection." The engine rumbled to life, the bay filling with that deep mechanical vibration that can hide 100 sins. The old man watched, silent, as the vehicle's weight settled. Then he heard it again, the faint hiss, softer now, like a snake coiled under a rock. His shoulders tightened. He stepped forward, raising his hand slightly, not commanding, just warning. "Stop," he said, voice stronger now. "You're leaking pressure." The private snapped his head out from under the vehicle, angry. "You're not in charge here," he barked. "Back off." The old man didn't move. "If you roll that out," he said, "and that line pops under load, you'll lose braking assist. You'll have a 30,000-pound lesson you can't undo." The private's face hardened, pride going rigid. "We've got an inspection," he hissed. "We don't have time for your stories." That word, stories, stung because it was exactly what they thought his life was. Old tales, outdated boots, harmless nostalgia. The old man's gaze slid to the young soldier's hands, clean hands, confident hands, hands that hadn't yet been forced to choose between speed and survival. "Time is the one thing you never have enough of when something breaks," the old man said. The private stepped toward him, close enough to smell fuel and sweat. "You think you're special," he sneered. "You think those clown boots mean something." The old man stared at him for a long beat, then answered quietly, "They mean I'm still here." The private laughed, but it sounded thinner now. And then the bay doors echoed with a new sound, a crisp set of footsteps, measured, deliberate, followed by a voice with command in it asking, "Where is he?" The voice didn't belong to anyone in the motor pool chain the young mechanics recognized, and that uncertainty chilled the air faster than any reprimand could. Heads turned. Conversations died. A cluster of senior NCOs near the admin office straightened like marionettes pulled by a string. The old man didn't flinch. He simply lowered his hand and stepped half a pace back from the MRAP, as if making space for what was coming. Through the open bay doors, a small entourage moved with purpose. 2 aides, a lieutenant colonel with a clipboard, and at the center a tall, broad-shouldered general officer in a service uniform so crisp it looked carved, his face set in controlled focus. A general in a motor pool wasn't normal. A general on foot, walking directly toward one specific bay, was a message. The young mechanics felt it hit their stomachs like dropped weight. The lead private snapped to attention too late, wrench still in his hand. His friends followed, faces suddenly blank, bravado evaporating like mist. The general's gaze swept the bay, then locked onto the old man's boots first, those worn, scuffed boots that had been the punchline minutes ago. The general slowed. His eyes narrowed with recognition, not suspicion. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the MRAP's idling engine and the faint hiss of the leaking line, still whispering its warning beneath the noise. The general stepped closer, his expression shifting from focus to something deeper, shock, memory, and a kind of respect that didn't need explanation. He stopped a few feet from the old man and stared at him as if the years were collapsing. "It can't be," one aide whispered behind him, but the general didn't respond. The old man finally lifted his head fully, meeting the general's eyes without fear or pride, just quiet acknowledgement. The general's voice came out lower than expected, edged with disbelief. "Sir!" The word dropped into the bay like a live round. The young mechanics' mouths went dry. A general calling a contractor "sir" was impossible in their world. The old man gave a small nod, almost reluctant. "Morning," he said simply, like they were two men meeting by chance rather than history. The general's jaw tightened, and he took another step, looking at the old man's face, at the white beard, the weathered lines, the calm eyes that seemed to carry places no one wanted to imagine. "I was told you wouldn't come back," the general said quietly. "Not after," he stopped himself, swallowing the rest of the sentence like it was too heavy for a public bay. The old man's gaze flicked to the MRAP line, then back. "Didn't come back," he said. "Just ended up here." The general looked past him at the young mechanics, and his eyes sharpened. He didn't need to ask what had happened. He could feel the tension, see the stiff shoulders, the guilty stillness. The lead private tried to speak, but his throat failed him. The general turned back to the old man. "They giving you trouble?" he asked, controlled but dangerous. The old man's answer was calm, almost protective of the very men who'd mocked him. "They're young," he said. "They'll learn." The general inhaled slowly, as if steadying himself. "They'll learn today," he replied, and the temperature in the bay dropped. A senior sergeant major appeared at the doorway, face pale with urgency, and snapped a salute to the general. "Sir, parade field is ready if you want the formation," the sergeant major said. The young mechanics blinked. "Parade field? Formation? In the motor pool?" The general's gaze returned to the old man's boots again, and the corner of his mouth twitched like pain disguised as a smile. "You still wearing them?" he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. The old man glanced down at the boots and shrugged lightly. "They carried me through," he said. The general's eyes glistened for half a second, then hardened into command. He turned sharply to the sergeant major. "Call the battalion," he ordered. "Now!" The lead private's knees felt weak because he understood something at last. Whatever he thought those worn boots were, they weren't a joke. They were a marker, a reminder. And the entire base was about to find out why. The battalion formed on the nearest open hardstand like a wave of green and tan snapping into lines. Soldiers filing out of bays, drivers shutting off engines, supervisors barking short commands, and the motor pool, usually a chaotic orchestra, falling into a tense ceremonial hush. The general walked at the front with the old man beside him, not escorting him like a civilian, but pacing himself to the veteran's stride like an equal. The sight alone bent reality for everyone watching. The young mechanics who had laughed trailed behind with faces tight and pale, their earlier jokes now stuck in their throats like ash. As they approached the formation area, the sergeant major's voice cracked across the space. "Battalion, attention!" Hundreds of boots struck concrete at once, the sound thunderous, and then the line went still. The general stopped before the formation, then turned toward the old man, and for a moment he looked like a man standing at the edge of a memory he didn't want to revisit. His voice carried, steady and clear. "Soldiers," he began, "you train on equipment, you drill for standards, you learn procedures. But today you're going to learn something manuals can't teach." He gestured toward the old man in the faded red shirt, blue jeans, and those worn boots that seemed painfully ordinary until you saw what they did to the general's posture. "This man," the general said, "served when the missions didn't have press releases, when success was measured by who came home, and when failure meant names you never got to say out loud." The formation held its breath. Some soldiers frowned, trying to place him. Others recognized nothing, because legends don't always wear medals in daylight. The general continued, his gaze sweeping the ranks. "Years ago my unit was pinned down in a kill zone, vehicle disabled, radios compromised, medics low, and we had one man who stayed calm while everyone else tasted panic." He looked at the old man, and his voice softened with something like gratitude. "He rebuilt a broken line under fire with hands that never shook. He walked to a disabled truck through incoming rounds because he said, 'If the brakes fail, we all die.' He got us rolling, he got us out. And when the dust settled, he refused a ceremony, refused a speech, and asked only for a pair of boots that wouldn't slip in oil." A low murmur ran through the formation, quickly strangled by discipline. The general's eyes flashed toward the young mechanics standing off to the side, their shoulders hunched under invisible weight. "And today," the general said, "some of you laughed at those boots." The words hit hard because they were simple and undeniable. The general took one slow step toward the old man, heels aligning, posture sharpening to parade perfection. Then, without hesitation, he raised his hand and rendered the first salute. It was crisp, precise, and so heavy with meaning it seemed to silence even the wind. The entire formation froze, shock rippling through rows of faces. A general saluting a contractor was impossible unless the contractor wasn't what they thought. The old man's eyes flickered, a brief shimmer of emotion he tried to hide, and then he returned the salute with steady accuracy that betrayed training etched into muscle. The general dropped his hand and turned to the battalion. "Render honors," he commanded. "Now!" Like a single machine, the entire battalion snapped into salutes, hundreds of arms rising, boots planted, chins lifted. The young mechanics' faces crumpled with shame as they saluted too, because they couldn't do anything else. The old man stood at the center of it, not towering, not demanding, not smiling, just absorbing the moment like a man hearing a distant name called after years of silence. The general's voice carried again, firm. "You mocked what you didn't understand," he said. "You mocked a man who chose quiet service over recognition. Today you learn that respect isn't for rank alone, it's for sacrifice, skill, and the discipline to stay humble." The old man lowered his hand slowly, and the battalion lowered theirs in unison, the concrete still humming with the echo of that collective snap to attention. The reveal was complete. Those worn boots were not a joke. They were a history the entire base had just saluted. When the salutes dropped, the hardstand didn't return to normal noise. It stayed quiet in a different way, like the whole battalion was listening for a lesson that hadn't fully landed yet. The general turned slightly toward the old man, voice lower now, personal but still audible. "Sir," he said, "I owe you more than this." The old man shook his head once, gentle, almost tired. "You don't owe me anything," he replied. "Just don't let them forget why they're here." The general nodded, and then his eyes moved to the young mechanics standing rigid off to the side, their earlier swagger replaced by dread. He didn't shout at them. He didn't humiliate them. He simply said, "Step forward." Their boots scraped as they obeyed, the lead private swallowing so hard his throat visibly moved. They stopped a few feet from the old man, not knowing where to put their hands, their eyes, their pride. The private's voice cracked. "Sir, I didn't know," he managed. "We didn't know." The old man studied him with a gaze that didn't punish, didn't gloat, didn't enjoy their discomfort. He looked at them like he'd been them once, young, loud, convinced the world owed them recognition. "Not knowing isn't the worst part," the old man said quietly. "The worst part is deciding someone's worth by what you can see." The private blinked fast, shame burning his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The old man nodded once. "Good," he said, not harshly but firmly. "Now listen, because this is the only speech you're getting from me." He turned slightly toward the battalion, still gathered, still silent. "Every base has men you don't notice," he said. "Mechanics, cleaners, cooks, contractors, old veterans who don't talk about what they did because talking doesn't bring anyone back. You want to be leaders? Start by respecting the people who keep the machine running when no one's watching." He glanced down at his boots, then back up. "These boots aren't special," he added. "They're just honest. They've been through hard ground and they still show up. That's what matters." The general's face tightened like the words hit somewhere deep. He nodded to the sergeant major. "Effective immediately," the general said. "The MRAP repair gets redone under supervision, and every mechanic in this motor pool attends an additional standards briefing, taught by someone who knows what failure costs." He looked at the old man. "If you're willing," he added, respectful. The old man hesitated, eyes sweeping the rows of soldiers, then gave a small nod. "If it keeps them alive," he said, "I'll talk." The lead private exhaled like he'd been underwater. The punishment wasn't humiliation, it was responsibility. The battalion was dismissed, but as soldiers broke formation, something subtle happened. Men who would have walked past the old man yesterday slowed today. A few saluted. Others offered a quiet nod. No one laughed at the boots. The young mechanics lingered, unsure if they should approach again, but the old man solved it for them by stepping toward the MRAP bay with calm purpose. "You," he said to the lead private, not unkindly, "bring your tools." The private hurried after him. Inside the bay, the old man didn't rant. He didn't list his achievements. He crouched beside the line fitting and showed them, patiently, how threads should feel when they're right, how a hiss tells you a future you don't want, how pride makes hands rush. The private listened like his career depended on it, because now he understood something heavier than rank. Competence is a form of respect, and humility is a form of survival. Later, as the sun lowered and the motor pool returned to its normal roar, the old man walked toward the exit gate alone, broom and clipboard in hand, his worn boots making soft, steady sounds on the concrete. Behind him, a battalion of soldiers worked a little quieter, a little sharper, and a lot more respectful, because they'd learned the kind of lesson that doesn't fade. You don't mock the boots of a man who's walked through hell and still chooses to show up.